Business Review, a daily program that delves into the latest and most significant economic stories. From stock markets to currency news, Business Review covers the most up-to-date stories in the global financial world.
Protesters in Vienna and Munich marched the annual May Day demonstrations in a different way to previous years due to the coronavirus. In the Austrian capital, dozens of protesters demonstrated against lockdown measures, angered by the government's decision to act early during its coronavirus outbreak to close restaurants, bars, schools, non-essential shops, and other gathering places 6 weeks ago. DIY stores, garden centers, and smaller shops reopened 2 weeks ago. Bigger shops and hairdressers follow from May the 1st. Meanwhile, in Munich, dozens of people from unions, political parties, and anti-fascist movements gathered in front of the town hall instead of the usual march which takes place on the day commemorating workers' rights. The German state of Bavaria, where Munich is located, has imposed some of the strictest social distancing measures. Encouraged by lower infection figures 2 weeks ago, Germany allowed smaller stores to reopen, along with car and bicycle dealers and bookstores, provided they adhere to strict distance learning and hygiene rules. A small Fridays for Future protest also took place in Munich, although the youth protest movement for climate action, started by Greta Thunberg, has largely moved online since the pandemic.
India is likely to ease its restrictions amid the COVID-19 pandemic as the second phase of national lockdown is expected to expire. India has imposed 2 rounds of nationwide lockdown to fight against the outbreak. The lockdown's first phase of 21 days was from March 25th till April 14th, and the second phase of 19 days is continuing till May 3rd. Some analysts say that India is likely to extend the lockdown on 20% of its worst affected areas, and the remaining 80% will be partially or completely lifted. The Indian Home Ministry said that new rules would be published after the second phase expires, and that decisions would be made on where the lockdown would be lifted. Some Indian media believe that the government is likely to decide whether to lift the lockdown according to the situation of the outbreak in each region. India's Federal Health Ministry said that it had conducted a nationwide survey of the outbreak, with 129 hotspot districts, 297 non-hotspot districts, and 300 districts completely unaffected by the novel coronavirus. According to the statistics of the Health Ministry, the confirmed cases in 15 districts, including New Delhi and Mumbai, account for more than 60% of the total number of cases in the country. Therefore, the restrictions on those districts are most likely to be extended, while others are expected to be partially or completely lifted. Analysis show that India is trying to lift its lockdown mainly for 2 reasons. First, the economic conditions are worsening. The country's economy has been seriously hit by the virus since March 25th, with millions of people out of work, most of whom are migrant workers. Recently, international rating agencies Moody's Investors Services and Fitch Group slashed India's economic growth forecast for this year to 0.2% and 0.8% respectively. The other reason for the lift of the lockdown is that about 80% of areas in India is not severely affected, and there is little need to maintain the restriction measures.
Residents in the Swiss city of Zurich took to the streets and their balconies to protest for better wage protection during the coronavirus crisis. Makeshift drums were banged and other musical instruments played as workers marked May Day. Protesters say that more needs to be done to protect workers who face economic uncertainty as a result of the lockdown. Although the government have stepped in to offer some support, The president of the Swiss Trade Union Federation says more needed to be done. Switzerland had reportedly nearly 30,000 cases of COVID-19 and more than 1,350 deaths, but caseloads are easing and some cities have begun to relax measures which were never as strict as in neighboring France or Italy to begin with.
Amazon.com Incorporated forecasts second quarter profit below estimates as the e-commerce company spent more on hiring workers and their pay due to a surge in online shopping during the COVID-19 pandemic. According to research firm FactSet, the company forecast operating income in the range of a loss of $1.5 billion and profit of $1.5 billion for the second quarter. Analysts were expecting operating income of $3.80 billion. The company said Amazon's forecast assumes about $4 billion in costs related to COVID-19.
Mexico's foreign minister said the Mexican health authorities will be the ultimate arbiters of when the economy reopens, responding to pressure from U.S. lawmakers to increase bilateral coordination on synchronizing key supply chains. The foreign minister, Marcelo Ebrard, told a news conference that health authorities would plan what would be a guide Mexico to action after U.S. senators in a letter urged the U.S. State Department to coordinate with Mexico over what companies should be considered essential, concerned about disruptions to cross-border supply chains. Ebrard said the letter was not a bilateral issue, describing it as a domestic U.S. matter, and noted Mexico had exemplary communication with U.S. authorities. With North American economies tightly integrated, an extended shutdown in Mexico would crimp the ability of U.S. factories to reopen. Mexico is drawing up a calendar to permit automakers and their suppliers to return to work in time for the reopening of the U.S. auto industry, which come after May the 4th.
Lebanese Prime Minister Hassan Diab said a reform program approved by government would be used to apply for an International Monetary Fund program to help the economy through an acute crisis that could last up to 5 years. The financial crisis is seen as the biggest threat to Lebanon's stability since the 1975 to 1990 civil war. Rooted in decades of state waste, corruption and bad governance, the crisis is causing mounting economic hardship and fueling unrest. A protester was killed during rioting in the northern city of Tripoli this week, and dozens of security forces were wounded. Saddled with one of the world's biggest public debt burdens, the state defaulted on its sovereign debt in March for the first time. The government declared hard currency reserves had hit critically low levels and were needed for vital imports. The local currency has shed more than half its value, and savers have been largely shut out of their deposits since October, when countrywide protests erupted against ruling politicians. Consumer goods prices in the import-dependent country have shot up by 50% since then. The IMF is widely seen as Lebanon's only way to secure financing. Foreign governments that have supported Lebanon in the past have said it must implement long-delayed reforms before it gets any aid this time. Lebanon is seeking external finance support in excess of $10 billion, Diab said. That is in addition to some $11 billion of funds that were pledged at a Paris Donors Conference in 2018 for infrastructure projects that were conditional on long-delayed reforms. Four days before Italy begins to gradually lift strict lockdown restrictions, people across the country are increasingly frustrated by the social and economic problems that 2 months of quarantine has brought. Doctors and nurses in Turin demonstrated outside their hospital over the lack of personal protection equipment for workers dealing with the new coronavirus. Workers from the Molinietti of Turin hospital gathered outside holding banners reading "Heroes" in the newspaper headlines, but treated like beggars. And maybe not everything is going to be okay, a play on the phrase that has become a symbol of hope and displayed on banners across Italy. Meanwhile, in Rome, a small group of workers protested outside Palazzo Chigi, the Prime Minister's office, to demand government help as they struggled to pay rent, mortgages and bills. In a speech to Parliament, Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte said he would gradually relax the country's coronavirus lockdown, taking into account differences in contagion levels in different parts of the country. Conte said a new stimulus package to support the economy, due to be presented in a few days, would include 15 billion euros for companies and 25 billion directly for payroll workers and the self-employed. In Rome, a cafe came up with an alternative way to keep their business alive until bars and restaurants can reopen from June 1st. Driving a small coffee truck around Rome, selling takeaway coffees for deliveries to homes and shops.
This has been Business Review, your daily source for the most critical stories in the financial world. Tune in next time for the latest financial news impacting the world economy.